Well, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Kendra Albright, and this is KM 61095 Issues and Trends in Knowledge Management, or the subtitle is Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About KM, but Were Afraid to Ask. And today we're going to be talking with Tim Wood Powell. He's a consultant in New York who I've met just over the last few years and really enjoyed our time together. And he's going to be talking about valuation today. So we'll start, first of all, with just letting Tim tell you about his background and how he got into this line of work. So I pose those questions to you, Tim, and let you take it away.
Yeah, well, it's a long story, but I'll try to collapse it a little bit. I started with the field of knowledge without even knowing it because I was a science major. I was a pre-med major and worked in a medical school one summer and that kind of thing. I finished that program and I was still at Yale. I was at Yale University and doing a BA in those days. And I decided to get interested in psychology. So I studied psychology for a year and then I got interested more in philosophy. And so they had a program called Psychology and Philosophy. It was a brand new program. So I ended up majoring in that and studying, getting into the beginning of my studies in philosophy, which I continue to this day. Then I went to the School of Hard Knocks, and I worked for 6 years. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Knew I did not want to be a medical doctor. For that's a whole nother conversation we can have offline. But I didn't know what I did want to do. The field that I ended up being in wasn't really invented yet. So, so I worked for 6 years in various capacities as a psychologist, as a matter of fact, and very interesting. I wrote a book, as a matter of fact, in that period of time, unpublished, but on small group dynamics, it still comes in handy. But then I decided to heed the call when Yale University started the School of Management, which was brand new at the time. And I found out about this and decided, in the real world, what I really needed was political science and economics. And I managed to get away with not studying either of those at Yale, which has great departments in both fields, but I didn't go near any of that stuff. But so I finished that program. I was hit at one point by one of my professors was Sidney Winter, who was writing writing a book at that time on economics, a sort of new view of economics. And one day he said, just almost in passing, companies compete on their knowledge. And I came up after class. This was a new idea to me. This was 1980 probably. And I said, what did you say? Companies what? Compete on their knowledge. Yeah. So this kind of was a lightning bolt that I got very interested in. Out of Yale School of Management, I was recruited to work in KPMG and was very lucky to be part of a data analytics, what we call data analysis was my major School of Management, and finance and operations research. So then at KPMG, we ran very crude analytic models. We were, sucking in information from the outside world, which in those days people just didn't even know what we were doing. We had acoustic modems, and it was very, very primitive. But it was the beginnings of what became data analytics later on. I did that for 5 years, and I, among other things, did a project on product development for the firm. It was a very exciting project. Let's develop a new product to make more money. I thought that was really cool innovation. So then I was offered a job doing innovation full time at PwC in the marketing area. They wanted to do a new product development area, just job. And there were a couple of people doing new service development, we called it. And in the course of new service development, I found that my best friend became the librarians because I was hungry for knowledge. I was trying to find out about new markets. And this was before the internet. This was in the crude, dark ages of information. So we were trying to find out, what's the market for this? It happened to be financial services I was working in. What's the market for personal financial planning was one of the things I worked on. And finding out about the outside world was in those days extremely practically stone chisel era. We had to, it's like tough. Telephones were our best thing. And but I became so interested in the process of this information process that I decided in my next life, which is about 5 years into that. My life tends to go in 5 year increments. I kind of get bored with things after 5 years. So the next 5 year increment, I said, well, I want to kind of go to the dark side. And this information stuff, this is really kind of cool and interesting. And I think it's going to really uh, change things. And I went to a company called Find SVP. I just wrote to them one day and uh, to the chairman, who had also gone to Yale. I didn't know him, but I got a letter back from a guy Don Ebel, who worked with him. And he said, why don't you come down and talk? And this was the most interesting job I ever had working for Find SVP. I tell people we're sort of like Google before Google. We were basically 350 people basically in one big room. It was an old ladies department store on 6th Avenue. And so it was a lot of camaraderie, a lot of knowledge sharing, because you'd literally bump into people in the aisles. You couldn't help but bump into people. It was like there were library stacks over here. There were a lot of people on the phone bringing in sort of quick response stuff. There were fax machines. That's still the era we were in. All the current technologies of the day, which make it seem very primitive, but it was before Google or any of that stuff. So when we had about 2,000 clients, and they would call us up at the rate of about 7,000 times a month and say, what about this? What about that piece of information, or a piece of what we would call knowledge now? The group that I was in was supposed to, and what we did do is take these quick response answers that Find was known for, and then amplify those into larger projects. Sometimes people would call up and just want a factoid for the CEO's speech the next day. What's the price of tea in China? And sometimes you'd find out, as I did one day, that they needed a whole sort of view of what a market was for a new product that they were developing. So it was just fascinating work. And but this thing called the internet came along, and I had a feeling that if the internet really proved to be something lasting, this is in the early 1990s when I was there, that I could start my own business. I didn't need stacks of books or stacks of fax machines, that I could start my own business with a phone and a computer, which is exactly what I did. Yesterday was the 27th anniversary of the founding of my company. And the knowledge agency became known as the knowledge agency. And from there, I one of the I had been known for competitive intelligence and market research. That the field I was most involved with was competitive intelligence. I helped to get a group called the Society of Competitive Intelligence Professionals organized in New York, and served on the board and stuff like that. So I had a lot of contacts from that field. And I was very interested in knowledge and knowledge management, because at that point, the conference board had just come out with a report that 27% of companies had chief knowledge officers. This is probably the early or mid 90s. And I thought, wow, this is great. I want to be the McKinsey of that. I want that space for myself. Um, so, um, so I started my company, but meanwhile, the first client engagement I got was from a large well-known U.S. company, saying, well, yeah, the knowledge stuff is nice, but do you still do competitive intelligence? Well, yeah, if you'll pay me. Basically, I didn't say it in those words, but they supported me for about 12 years. In my first 12 years, were just doing what my very large, prestigious client wanted to do in the competitive intelligence field, competitive strategy. But it delayed my really thinking about what I wanted to do. And we went through a couple of interesting financial recessions, the recession of 2000 and the recession then of 2008. And during the latter of which I was let go, the whole company reorganized and I was let go. So in 2008, in the middle of the deepest recession that I've known in my lifetime, I could begin my professional life over and say, okay, now I can do that knowledge stuff. And I remember getting a call from a guy who was interested in investing in my company when the stock market crashed. He said, okay, Tim, now what are you going to do? How are you going to sell this knowledge stuff? How are you going to sell this knowledge stuff is a term that I heard later on when Larry Prusak and I crossed paths in Columbia when I was teaching there. He said, how are we going to sell this knowledge stuff? So that became the fascination of my life when Guy St. Clair, whom I knew through, who brought me into Columbia, teaching there. I taught there for, again, about 5 years as an adjunct. He said, I've got this book contract in the series, and I want you to be the first author of the first book in the series other than his own. And I said, yes, let's do it. And he said, okay, well, what are you going to write on? And I said, well, how about the value of knowledge? So that became the book that I most recently, it's out of focus, but it's not a beautiful title.
I'll make sure that the students
Yeah,
get that
there it
citation
is,
for
value of
that.
knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that the value of knowledge, this book, this thin couple 100-page book, is all of my experiences, clinical experiences through my work and my readings and that kind of thing. I put it all in there, but so it's very dense. But that has now become my life, explaining explaining what I meant in the book and doing some more videos and conversations, like this one is kind of one of the things that really occupies me. So the anyway, I hope I forget what your question originally was, but the
I
just
just wanted
my
to
bio.
talk about you
Yeah,
yourself. Yeah. So the
yeah,
students know who you are.
yeah,
I just have a couple of comments I wanted to make. Is
yeah.
really an interesting thing because my own career has tracked yours, but to a smaller, more narrow place than New York, where a lot of this stuff was happening. I was doing some of this in the scientific and technical information field in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, but Find SVP, when I got my master's in library science, an MSLS, in 1985. Find SVP was the hottest show in town. It was doing great work. I was so excited about that. And I was interested in special libraries. And so this was, the kind of non-traditional library work that attracted me. So I knew all about Find SVP. And yeah, and I was a member of SKIP. That's the Society of Competitive Intelligence Professionals.
Yes, ma'am.
Was Guy in that as well? Do you remember?
No, I didn't meet Guy till later on, and that's a story in itself. But I should also mention Mike Koenig, who got me teaching at the Palmer School of Library and Information Science at Long Island University. That was the first teaching I did in 2004. So neither of them were involved in SKIP. My SKIP friends were still involved with a group called the CI Fellows, the group of people who were sort of senior gray hairs. And now we're starting to like die off. But the people who founded that group are still around and still active. So I'm still sort of re-engaging with that network of people.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yes, and I've known Mike Koenig for a long time too, so that's great. I wanted you to tell me the name or tell us the name of your book that you wrote when you were when you were a psychologist. What was the name of that book?
Oh, the we'll call it Family Action Systems. It's unpublished, so you can't find it. In fact, I can't find it. It's in one of my warehouses, and but it's there. And I mean to go back and revisit it because what we did is we had a grant from the federal government to go in and do this research. And what we did, what I did, is literally go to families. I was still in New Haven. I went into families in New Haven, lower income families who were just starting their own families, and we studied the group dynamics. I worked for a guy named George Witt, who's a PhD psychologist, and we studied the dynamics within the small group of the family. And he had a theory, which was what the book is about. He was we were co-authors, that there were 25 different action systems that a small group like a family would needed to manage to be healthy and survive.
Hmm, that's
It was
interesting.
very interesting. Yeah. So I got the whole book done, and I basically did the writing and he did the thinking, and some of the thinking at least. And but it was all a lot of case studies, and we took careful journaling. Your students will appreciate that we journaled, what they call it now. We just called writing our visit. So every time we'd go for an hour visit, I would come back and then write up in detail what happened. So
Mhm.
I have stacks and stacks of these case studies from these families. I would love to go back. That was a long, long time ago. I mean, the kids that were just being born when we did the study probably have their own kids now, but
Yeah.
it'd be great to do a follow-up study. But I erroneously assumed, and this became sort of part of my knowledge value chain model later on, that all the knowledge I was gathering would find a market sort of magically. I had no idea how this happened. In fact, I thought my partner had the publishing contract and at contacts and contracts. And it turns out when I finished the book and put the last dot on the last I said, okay, now go sell this puppy. And he didn't have the contacts. We just did, the thing just died right there.
Yeah. Yeah. I have stories like that too.
But it was a great learning experience, and it was really great. I thought really his ideas were very sound. I think it was great research. He wasn't, unfortunately, not connected with Yale, which would have been a great thing too, to
Yeah.
get some people there, which I could have done, but I
Yeah.
didn't do. So all of that's thinking about to your students is thinking about this knowledge stuff is wonderful, but as Larry Prusek says, how are you going to sell it? You always have to think about the economic context. Always, always, always. Even when I was working in a nonprofit, part of what I ended up doing, as any nonprofit person knows, is because I could write. I went to Yale, and that's one thing they make sure you can do. Is I wrote the grant proposals. So every year we had to do a series of grant proposals and fly down to Washington and defend our grant proposals. You're always begging for money in a very sophisticated way, but it's all about the Benjamins. Even the nonprofit world is about the value proposition. So that's how I got sort of fascinated. I was always fascinated by knowledge and information. Ever since my mother used to take me to the library in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania, and I was just always thought that was a magical place. But later on, I became interested in value, and that's why I went to business school, is to learn about value, how value creation. It sounded kind of miraculous, uh, and I came out of 2 years of intense study and conversations having more questions about it. It's like it's a very mysterious thing. That's what I tried to get at in my book and tried to convey. It's very mysterious subject, complex subject, particularly when it comes to knowledge and intangibles.